The morning the billionaire's daughter decided she would never walk again, the sun was shining so brightly that the hospital windows looked like sheets of gold. Outside, people hurried through the city with coffee in their hands and plans in their minds, completely unaware that behind one of those windows, a 19-year-old girl named Seraphina Vale was quietly giving up on life. She had been paralyzed from the waist down after a terrible car accident 2 years earlier, and despite the finest doctor's money could buy, nothing had changed. Her father, Vale, had spent millions on surgeries, specialists, rehabilitation centers, and experimental treatments, but every new promise eventually became another disappointment. That afternoon, Seraphina stared at her motionless legs beneath a white blanket and pushed away the wheelchair beside her bed. For the first time, she told her father that she did not want another doctor, another treatment, or another reason to hope. She simply wanted everyone to stop pretending that her life could become what it used to be. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can give someone a second chance when the world has already given up on them, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories like this to you. Vale was one of the richest men in the country, a self-made billionaire whose name appeared on skyscrapers, technology companies, luxury hotels, and charitable foundations. Yet none of his wealth could buy the one thing he wanted most, his daughter's smile. Seraphina had once been fearless. She rode horses before sunrise, traveled without bodyguards, painted landscapes, and dreamed of becoming an architect. After the accident, however, the girl who once filled their enormous mansion with music became a prisoner of her bedroom. She stopped painting. She stopped going outside. She refused visitors. Even the nurses learned not to open the curtains unless she asked. Tried everything, but his desperation often made things worse. He kept bringing experts who spoke about percentages and possibilities, while Seraphina only heard another reminder that she had become a problem that money could not solve. Across the city lived a man named Mateo Raines, a 38-year-old single father who had never owned anything expensive enough to impress anyone. He worked during the day as a maintenance technician at a rehabilitation center and spent his evenings caring for his 10-year-old daughter, Juniper. Mateo had lost his wife several years earlier, and since then he had learned how to balance school lunches, unpaid bills, grocery shopping, long work shifts, and the endless responsibilities of raising a child alone. He was not wealthy, powerful, or connected. But Mateo possessed something Seraphina's doctors could not prescribe: patience. He understood that sometimes people did not need someone to fix them. Sometimes they simply needed someone willing to sit beside them while they were broken. One bright Tuesday morning, Mateo arrived at the rehabilitation center carrying a toolbox in one hand and a paper bag of homemade sandwiches in the other. Juniper had insisted that he take an extra sandwich because she said he looked too tired to survive another workday. While repairing a faulty therapy machine, Mateo noticed a young woman sitting alone near the courtyard window. Her wheelchair was positioned so that she could see the garden, but she looked as though she hated everything in front of her. Mateo did not know she was Seraphina Vale. He only knew she had the expression of someone who had been told to be hopeful too many times. A few minutes later, Seraphina tried to move her wheelchair away from the window. One wheel caught against the edge of a carpet, and she became frustrated. A nurse hurried toward her, but Mateo quietly stepped forward and fixed the problem without making a dramatic scene. He adjusted the wheel, moved the carpet, and walked away. Seraphina expected sympathy, but none came. There was no pity in his face, no exaggerated smile, and no speech about miracles. That strange absence of pity stayed in her mind. The next morning, Mateo saw her again. This time, he noticed that she was struggling with a sketchbook resting awkwardly on her lap. Without asking unnecessary questions, he repaired a small clip on the wheelchair tray so the sketchbook would stay in place. Seraphina looked at him suspiciously, then showed him the unfinished drawing. It was supposed to be a picture of the hospital garden, but the page was mostly blank. Mateo did not tell her that it was beautiful. Instead, he pointed toward a crooked tree outside and encouraged her to draw that because, in his opinion, crooked things were often more interesting than perfect ones. Something about the simple observation made Seraphina almost smile. Over the following weeks, their friendship grew quietly. Mateo never treated Seraphina like a billionaire's daughter. He did not know about her fortune until much later. He talked to her about ordinary things: Juniper's terrible handwriting, the broken coffee machine at work, rainy mornings, burnt toast, and the ridiculous price of school shoes. Seraphina slowly began talking about herself again. She told him about the dreams she had abandoned. Mateo listened without interrupting. He never promised that she would walk again because he knew hope should never be built on a lie. Instead, he helped her discover smaller victories. Getting outside for 10 minutes became a victory. Painting one tree became a victory. Learning to transfer from the wheelchair with less assistance became a victory. Laughing became a victory. Cashin noticed the change almost immediately. His daughter had begun leaving her room. She asked for sunlight. She started painting again. She even complained about the hospital food, which Cashin considered a wonderful sign because complaining meant she was interested in life. But when he discovered that an ordinary maintenance worker was responsible for the change, his first reaction was anger. He believed Mateo was getting too close to his daughter and feared that someone might take advantage of her vulnerability. Cashin secretly investigated him and discovered that Mateo had debts, a modest apartment, and a daughter he was raising alone. One afternoon, Cashin confronted Mateo in the rehabilitation center parking lot. The billionaire expected embarrassment or defensiveness, but Mateo simply listened. Cashin accused him of becoming involved with Seraphina because of her wealth. Mateo looked at him with tired eyes and explained that he had never even known who she was when they first met. He had only seen a young woman who was hurting. Then he said something Cashin could not forget: wealth could surround a person with people, but it could not guarantee that anyone would truly see them. Cashin went home angry, but that night he stood outside Seraphina's bedroom and watched her paint. For the first time in 2 years, her curtains were open. The late afternoon sunlight fell across her canvas, illuminating a simple crooked tree. Cashin realized that he had spent so much time trying to purchase a miracle that he had forgotten to simply be her father. The greatest change came when Mateo invited Seraphina to visit a small community garden where Juniper volunteered every Saturday. Cashin initially refused, worried about safety, but Seraphina insisted. The garden was nothing like the luxurious places she had known. The path was uneven, the benches were old, and the flowers grew wildly in every direction. Yet there was something beautiful about it. Juniper greeted Seraphina without staring at her wheelchair. She simply handed her a pair of gardening gloves and asked her to help choose where to plant the next flower. Seraphina spent the afternoon outside beneath a bright blue sky. For the first time in years, she forgot to think about what her legs could not do. She thought about what her hands could create. She planted flowers with Juniper while Mateo repaired a broken wooden planter nearby. When the sun began to lower, Seraphina looked at the garden and cried. Not because she was sad, but because she had finally remembered that her life could still contain beautiful things. Months passed. Seraphina continued rehabilitation with a different attitude. She stopped measuring progress by whether she could stand and started measuring it by how much independence she gained. She learned new techniques, strengthened her upper body, and began designing accessible buildings from her wheelchair. The girl who once wanted her life to end began dreaming about a future again. Then, one warm afternoon, something unexpected happened. During a rehabilitation session, Seraphina was practicing with support bars when her therapist noticed a slight movement in one foot. It was tiny, almost impossible to see, but it was there. The doctors did not call it a miracle. They explained that recovery could be unpredictable and that nobody could promise what would happen next. Seraphina understood. She no longer needed promises. She kept working. 1 year later, Seraphina stood with assistants at the opening of a new community center designed according to her own architectural plans. The building included ramps, accessible gardens, wide pathways, and spaces designed for people with disabilities. Cashin had funded the project, but Seraphina insisted that the center carry a different name, the Second Chance House. Mateo and Juniper stood in the crowd as Seraphina slowly shifted her weight between two support bars. She was not walking freely, and she still needed assistance, but she was standing. Tears filled Cashin's eyes. Mateo smiled from the back of the crowd, knowing that the real victory had happened long before that moment. Seraphina later understood that Mateo had never changed her life by performing some impossible miracle. He changed it by refusing to treat her as hopeless. He reminded her that a person's future is not defined by the worst thing that ever happened to them. Her accident had changed her body, but it did not have to own her dreams. Years later, Seraphina became an advocate for accessible architecture and founded programs that helped disabled young people return to education and creative careers. Cashin became less obsessed with business and more involved with his family and charitable work. Mateo continued repairing things at the rehabilitation center, often joking that he had spent his life fixing broken machines only to discover that the most important things he ever helped repair were human hearts. And Juniper, who had once planted that first flower beside Seraphina, eventually became a talented gardener who proudly told everyone that she had taught a billionaire's daughter how to get her hands dirty. Seraphina never forgot the day she believed her life was over. She also never forgot the ordinary man who sat beside her without pity and helped her discover that hope did not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes hope entered quietly, carried a toolbox, smelled like machine oil, and brought a homemade sandwich wrapped in paper. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a second chance, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub for more stories about kindness, courage, and unexpected hope. Sometimes one small act of kindness can become the reason someone chooses to keep going. Before we end, comment "Hope" below if you believe that no one should ever be given up on simply because their life looks different from what they once imagined. Because sometimes, the person who changes your life is not the richest person in the room, the most powerful person in the city, or the person who can buy you a miracle. Sometimes, it is simply the person who sees you when everyone else sees your weakness. Mateo could not give Seraphina back the life she had before the accident. What he gave her was something even more powerful, the courage to build a new life from the pieces that remained. And in the end, Seraphina discovered the truth that had been waiting for her all along: losing one version of your life does not mean losing your future.